Welcome into today's episode of Pushing the Pile. Mike Renner here, along with JP Acosta, as always. And we're going to be running through the 2026 NFL Draft position groups. We'll be ranking from 10 to 1, going through every single position group in this draft class, ranking the relative strength of it. I'll be giving how many guys are in the top 100 at those relative to kind of what we see historically at those positions. And then just giving our overview kind of on those position groups. So without further ado, let's get right into it. We're going to start from 10, work down to 1, start with the weakest position group in this draft class, go all the way to the strongest. And I don't think I'm breaking any ground here. Any fantasy football fans, any dynasty fans, I think already know that the running back group in the 2026 NFL Draft is a tough one. It is, for right now, in my top 100, there are only 2 guys. Last year, we saw 6 drafted in the top 100. I think we'll probably see more than 2 drafted, but it would surprise me if we get more than 4 in this draft class. This year's running back class, it just feels like you got Jeremiah Love, who's going to go probably top 10, more than likely top 5 at this point. You got Jadarian Price's teammate, who's going to come off the board somewhere in the second round. And then after that, there's a lot of question marks. I don't know if you see this too differently, this class, JP, but I think we can all agree that this class is a tough one for the NFL's purposes.
I think I might be a little higher on the potential of Arkansas's Mike Washington to get into the top 100 because like 6'1", 223, running 4.3, he's probably going to get drafted higher. But it feels like this running back class has a lot of specialists outside of Jeremiah Love and potentially Jadarian Price. Like, I love Jonah Coleman, but he's more of a thumper between the tackles, can help out in pass protection. But even once you get past the consensus sort of top 4 or 5 guys, there's not a lot of concrete what we do know about these prospects. Like, we want to point to the Penn State running backs. Katron Allen, we do know is a reliable runner between the tackles, just doesn't have that breakaway speed or agility to be a featured back. And then his teammate Nick Singleton, we wish we could have had testing, but he broke his foot because he's a great athlete, but he's not that great of a football player right now. Once you get past those guys, you're looking at guys like Damon Claiborne, Rashul Faison, Robert Henry Jr. from UTSA. Like, there are a lot of specialists, Kalen Black and Roman Hemby from Indiana. Just all these there are different body types, but also just very small role guys. And you don't draft small role guys in the top 100.
Exactly. I think that's the biggest thing, is that I don't see a lot of guys profiling to do it all bell cows. And that's, unfortunately, not to say that role players aren't important at the position, but role players more often than not are day 3 picks. So if you're a by committee guy or a specialist, and there's some good specialists in this draft class, that just relegates you to a later pick in this draft. I do think it's interesting, though, that that it's just a old class. I think that I've been banging the table this year that this is kind of an inflection point for NIL in the draft, that this class specifically is kind of the first class where the money got so big at the collegiate level that it's convincing a lot of guys to come back. There's only 1 junior in this running back. I mean, that is unthinkable historically. That's so different from what we've become accustomed to. I mean, just think back to, 5 years ago to a decade ago. The common wisdom was jump as soon as you can. I mean, we had guys who weren't even starters coming out after 3 years at that point in time, just because the clock was ticking to go get your money at the NFL level. Everyone wanted that second contract at that position. Now it's like running backs are more valuable in college. They're getting paid more if you come back and get your NIL money than if you come out in the draft and you're even like a 3rd round pick. So I think this position, more than any other, saw the big inflection point this year where a lot of guys got convinced to come back to school. And I just think even outside of that, it's not a great class. Now, next year looks like a different animal. We'll talk about that then. But this year's running back class, I think, just going to be slim pickings. Let's get to the next position here. Number 9 in terms of the top 10. Top 10, there's only 10. 9 ranked position group heading into the 2026 NFL Draft. To me, it's the quarterback position. Not that it's terrible, not that it's 2022 levels of, man, there's not going to be anyone this year, but it's Fernando Mendoza, and then it's a ton of question marks, and then it's just thin too. I don't even think there's more than like 5 names that I would even want to draft, that I'm even considering for like a backup role at the NFL level. And once you're relegating guys to backup roles, that's again pushing them down way down the board, even at a valuable position like quarterback. So I only have three in my top 100. It's Fernando Mendoza, it's Ty Simpson, and it's actually Cole Payton from North Dakota State, who I more value as an athlete and what he can do in that role than just necessarily his quarterback ability. But it is a tough group at the quarterback position.
We've come a long way since this time last year where we were like, hey, the 2026 class is going to be a lot of elite quarterbacks in this one. Arch Manning, Dante Moore. We're going to get Lenore Sellers entering this draft. And I think your point that you said about the running backs with NIL and this being an inflection point, that has become very true with the quarterback class, because something that I noticed last year and even the year before with the Caleb Williams, Drake May draft is I think teams are going to want to lean more into the fact that quarterbacks have experience and have like actual live reps at multiple schools or extended time playing quarterback in college. Because I think when you look at, I guess if you want to call him a miss, if he is a miss right now, Anthony Richardson, he was drafted in the top 5 despite having one full season as a starter. And so I think that was kind of scaring teams off of drafting the guy for potential and wanting to get guys with more experience. So I think that is sort of taking a hit out of this QB class, but also this class just doesn't feel like it has a lot of guys with overwhelming traits or overwhelming tools near the top. I mean, the guy with the best tools, like physically, to be a star quarterback might be Taylon Green, and he's just tools at this point. So I think, like you said, it is Mendoza, then there is a gap, and then there's everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, Taylon Green, Drew Aller look the part. Those are the two guys who yeah, you want to develop a guy, that's what it should look like. Unfortunately, they're kind of the flip side of the coin, where the more they played football, the more it's like, oh, wait, they didn't develop. The more everyone realized that, hey, these guys are super toolsy, but they haven't actually shown anything on the football field. And then so kind of the shine wears off. They could have been like these NBA lottery picks, but now all of a sudden it's like, oh, they played too much. And the NFL kind of realized that maybe the developmental potential is always just going to be potential and never be realized with those guys. So yeah, this quarterback group, I agree 100%, is the other position that's super indicative of what's going on with the NIL money. Because, again, I think 5 years ago, Lenora Sellers comes out in this draft, the South Carolina quarterback. It's probably taken somewhere in the top 10 just because of how physically gifted he is. But he gets to come back to school. Dante Moore from Oregon probably comes out. Maybe even Arch Manning would have come out. But it is now a pretty sparse class. That's why, again, I've been banging the table for a little bit. I think Ty Simpson just goes higher purely based off of necessity. If it's not Ty Simpson, it's nobody in this draft class. So I think he ends up going a little bit higher than people think, but we'll see. All right. Those are our weakest 2 positions in the draft class. We're going to work our way towards the strongest. We're going to take a quick break. After that, we got interior defensive line and tight ends coming up right after this. Welcome back to Pushing the Pile. We're rolling through the strongest position groups in the 2026 NFL draft class. We hit running back and quarterback already. The 8th strongest position group in this draft class, well, it's interior defensive line. I don't think the depth is too dissimilar to what we see in most years. I actually have 11 guys in my top 100 in this interior defensive line class, and we saw 12 go last year, so kind of right in line historically. But what it lacks is the top end talent. No DT in my top 16, only 3 in the top 50. There is not that game-changing type of prospect in this draft class. A Jalen Carter, a Byron Murphy, a guy that's just a dude in this DT class. I think it would look a lot different if Caleb Banks from Florida were fully healthy and played this whole past season. But with his foot injury at the combine, with his injury history, with how little football he's played, I do think this DT class just has more question marks than answers at this point.
I'm actually really fascinated by this interior defensive line class, mainly for the reasons that you said. I think Caleb Banks is the best defensive tackle in this class. But when you look at his limited playing tape, his injury history with now another broken foot that's going to set him back, And then you just look at some of the history of big, tall defensive tackles with foot injuries. That's not exactly a thing that pans out in the NFL. But his talent, just watching him this season when he came back against Tennessee, against LSU, like he was dominant in those games. So I truly wonder where his stock is going to fall. Peter Woods is another guy that I think is immensely talented, but we do have to ask the question of what happened at Clemson in 2025. It just seemed like nothing clicked for any of those Clemson guys outside of Avion Terrell. But even outside of that, I'm fascinated by this class because this year it's flipped from last year. Last year, there were a lot of three techniques and very few nose tackles. This year, there's a logjam of nose tackles with Lee Hunter, Caden McDonald, Christian Miller, Dominic Orange, Dale Jackson Jr., all sort of like clumped in that day 2, late day 1 range. I'm curious how the NFL sort of shakes them out and how guys are more undersized three techs, like a guy like Grayson Halton, Caleb Proctor from Southeast Louisiana, Zane Durant. I wonder how those guys start to find themselves shaking that up and down the board because there's just not a lot of those three techniques in this class.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so, I guess, underwhelming. Why I rank it 8th is because the run defenders are great, right? And run defense is getting more important, and that's going to be, I think, an interesting trend to follow is how highly these DTs do go because of how important they are to run defense. And guys like Caden McDonald from Ohio State, who's, for my money, easily the best run defender in this draft class. You're not going to get much, if any, pass rush for him, but you know you're getting a high-end run defender. How highly does the NFL covet that? How much does just a 2-down player, but who can be really good in that 2-down role, how much is the NFL going to say, yeah, this guy's a first rounder, or are they? So I think that's going to be interesting to track with this class. But at the end of the day, what gets paid, still pass rush, and it is light on pass rushers, especially when Peter Woods looked like he could have been that guy, but objectively was not this past year as a junior. And then he has like a 6'4" wingspan, historically small wingspan for a top DT prospect. So a lot of warts in this DT class. Flip to the other class though here. Number 7 in my rankings of the 10 strongest position groups in the class, tight ends. Now, last year, I loved the class, right? You saw 5 go in the top 100. Well, 5 actually go in the top 75, multiple first rounders. I thought Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren, I'm like, these guys are high-end prospects. I think we saw that right away as rookies. This year, I only have 4. And outside of Kenyon Sadiq, pretty much all the other 3 are back-end, third-round sort of guys, not the sort of prospects we saw go in the meat of day 2 a year ago. So it really is Kenyon Sadiq and then just some like interesting athletes at the position. I think the meat of this class, where it actually gets strong, is early day 3. I think there's going to be a ton of 4th-round tight ends, and I think there's going to be a lot of good blockers come out of this draft class. I just don't know if we see too many dynamic receivers outside of Kenyon Sadiq come off the board here.
I think I'm a little bit lower on this tight end class, mainly because that point you just said is the guys that are the great receivers in this class aren't great blockers or need time as blockers. And the guys that are great blockers aren't great receivers. So it feels like there aren't that many guys that offer that true blend of being able to hold up in inline blocking situations, which is where a lot of tight ends have to be able to win now in the NFL, and also actually being able to affect the game as a receiver. I think Kenyon Sadiq can do that. I think he's a willing blocker. I think he has he's a split flow blocker. When they run split zone, Kenyon Sadiq is really good at that. I don't think he's never going to be a guy who digs out defensive ends at the point of attack. That's just not going to be his game. But when you go down the board, if guys behind him, if you like Eli Stowers, the NFL might see him more as a receiver because he just doesn't have the size and the technique to actually be a blocker. Justin Jolie from NC State gives effort as a blocker. I just don't think that he's that great of a blocker. I think if you're looking for the true blend, it's Oscar Delp out of Georgia. But we've talked about Delp ad nauseum and the fact that he just doesn't have a lot of production. So where do you draft a guy like that? Sam Roush from Stanford is a guy that is a great blocker, but doesn't have that great of hands and is limited in his receiving profile. So I'm a little bit lower on the class because there's just not a lot of like true, like inline, like wide tight ends. But I do think on day 3, you're going to find a lot of value in like true, like tight end 2, tight end 3s.
I wish we would have seen more Delp at the Shrine Bowl. I think that would have been great for his stock. We only saw like a couple of routes before he ended up dropping out for the week. But I'm with you that this is just a weird tight end class for all those reasons. But I do think the one I want to double click on, the guy who is the most intriguing, is Eli Stowers. I made some people mad because when I released my initial top fives by position, I didn't include him at tight end. I mean, watching him on tape, I'm like, this guy's not a tight end. But I was kind of floored that he came in at 239 to the combine and still tested like an elite athlete. And now 239 is still not a tight end in the NFL, right? You need to put on probably with his frame, he has a 6'7" wingspan. He's a big, long dude. He probably needs 10 to 15 more pounds before he's even sniffing, being able to play and handle the real tight end roles at the NFL level. But the fact that he's already 24 pounds up from what he was listed at when he was quarterback at Texas A&M 3 years ago, he's listed at 215 pounds, 24 pounds up and still holding his athleticism like that. I'm encouraged about where he can go because the track record of quarterbacks to tight ends and guys making that conversion is fairly strong historically. There's a lot of guys who have done just that and been successful. So I'm just intrigued by what he could ultimately be. But I do think going in when you draft Eli Stowers that this is a 3-year project and not a guy you really could probably throw on the football field outside of third downs right now.
Yeah, I don't think Stowers is going to be a guy that is going to be ready this year. And the question is, for a guy who's a senior prospect, like how high do you draft a guy who's not going to be ready to like play true tight end snaps, who's already an older prospect? But again, the athleticism, just 45.5-inch vertical jump can't be faked at 239 pounds. I think there is a way that you can get him on the field. If you want to turn him into a jumbo receiver, like if you want to make him in like Chase Claypool, I would understand that because like you said, on tape, he moved. Yeah, he basically is the same size as Claypool. He moves like a receiver, and Vanderbilt had him doing wide receiver stuff. So you could play him that way, but I do wonder like what he decides he wants to be at the NFL level because it's going to take a long time to get the blocking down.
All right, those are our weaker positions in the draft class. We're moving more towards what I would call average draft classes that historically are about what you'd expect at their respective positions. Coming up with edge and safety right after this. We're rolling through the position groups in the 2026 NFL Draft, ranking them from weakest to strongest. We've already hit running backs at 10, quarterbacks at 9, interior defensive linemen 8, tight end 7, and now we're on to the edge class at 6. This edge class, I think more so than any edge class I've scouted, keeps me up at night, trying to decide where to rank these guys because there is not a clean prospect of the bunch. There's not a guy who it's just like, ticks all the boxes, looks good enough, he's going to be good at the NFL level, let's do it. Every single one has something about their profile that just, I don't know what to do with Arvell Reese, who's the top guy on the board, obviously, for a lot of people, who's probably going to be the first one drafted at number 2 to the Jets. He's barely played it. He's rushed the passer less than 120 times in his whole collegiate career. With Ruben Bain, it's the sub 31-inch arms. With David Bailey, it's the up and down tape with guys who can match his speed. And just the fact that he wasn't even trusted to play the run until his senior year of college, and the stiffness he has off the edge. With Cassius Howell, it's the short arms. With Keldrick Falk, it's the inability to rush the passer. It's just something for all these guys. And so that's why there's 14 in my top 100. There were 14 drafted in the top 100 last year, but I just think this is an edge class that, yes, there will be talented guys from it, but I don't think we're going to be looking back in 5 years saying there was a ton of all pros from this draft class.
So somebody asked me about this edge class a couple weeks ago, and I responded with the Marge Simpson meme. I just think they're neat. And I just think this is a pretty neat edge class. Like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of stars, but I think there are a lot of quality players in this group. And I think it depends on what you look for when it comes to defensive linemen and edge prospects in general. For me, when I look at defensive line prospects and how I sort of group them, if they're all similar, I think run defense sort of sets your floor, and then pass rush sets the ceiling, because that's what will get you paid. But if you're a high floor, if you're a high ceiling run defender and you can get on the field that way, that's going to give you more opportunities to rush the passer, because teams would much rather, especially right now, as the NFL is getting bigger and as running the football is becoming more, I guess you want to say, in vogue, stopping the run has become really important. And that's why I think guys like Keldrick Falk are going to go a lot higher than people expect. But I think outside of this draft class, outside of the top guys in this draft class, and we've spoken a lot about this class. I've spoken a lot about sort of my holdups with David Bailey, especially as a top 10 pick. But this class is sort of similar to the defensive tackle class, where there's a lot of specialists and there's a lot of like third down pass rush guys. I think that group is Akeem Mesidor from Miami, Cassius Howell. I would put R. Mason Thomas from Oklahoma in there. Malachi Lawrence is in that group. And then you have the power players after those top guys. That's Gabe Akis, Zion Young, TJ Parker, Derek Moore. And then let's sort of like the weird body type guys. I'd put like Romello Height, Jayshon Barham from Michigan. Jayshon Barham could be a guy that we look back on as a day 2, like early day 3 pick. It's like, oh, that guy turned out to be good. But there's just so much projection that has to be done with this class. And yeah, I think that's part of where draft scouts and analysts get paid. That's what makes you. It's not what these players are right now, but what they can become.
Yes, I've said it for a lot of positions, but edge specifically, it is a evaluator's draft, because when everyone has something in their profile that's, I would call a fatal flaw. Now, obviously not fatal for their potential, but like something that's just like not good objectively about their profile. Well, then you got to weigh which one is the least not good, right? Which one can we live with if you're an NFL team? So very interested to see how it shakes out because of that. All right, the next position here, on to number 5. Safety. I think it's an interesting class because I love the top end of the safety class, specifically 2 guys, actually. Caleb Downs from Ohio State, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren from Toledo, the Ohio safeties, if we will. I think Emmanuel McNeil-Warren's kind of been undersold. I think he's a special prospect in his own right. These are first-round safeties for my money. Dylan Thieneman, kind of the next guy in that bunch, but to me, he's very much a second-round safety from Oregon. So I only actually have 6 in my top 100, which is about in line with what you see historically. So it's not great from that perspective, but I do think that the top end of this class is uniquely good at safety. And so maybe that bumps it up a little bit.
I think the safety class on days 1 and 2 are very good. Like you said, Caleb Downs, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, 2 of the more impactful defenders in this class. I agree with you on Dylan Thieneman being I think he's more of a day 2 safety. I just didn't really see the impact of a day 1 guy, but I think because of how he tested, he's going to be a day 1 guy. But even beyond Thieneman, Traden Stukes, Genesis Smith, both guys from Arizona who I think are going to get picked day 2, that are going to be very good, or at least quality starters at the NFL level. AJ Halsey is sort of your traditional, like, if you were building a box safety from like 2012, AJ Halsey is what it would look like. He's big, physical, plays well coming downhill. And then you look past those guys, you think about Zakee Wheatley from Penn State, Bud Clark out of TCU. There's so many guys on days 1 and 2 that will start right away for teams, whether that be in the nickel or whether that be at safety. But once you get past day 2, there aren't going to be a lot of day 3 guys at the position that are going to be very like impactful right away. So I think this class, like you said, is very top heavy. But if you're able to get a safety on day 2, then I think you're going to come away with some really nice value.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it gets thin after that. And that might convince teams to draft one higher. And I think this year specifically will be a great litmus test for where the NFL feels about the position, right? Because go back 5 or 6 years ago when the safety position was super devalued, that, Kyle Hamilton fell out of the top 10. Kyle Hamilton, obviously the best safety in the NFL probably now, and was so good on tape. Pretty much consensus on him was this was a can't miss safety, and he falls out of the top 10. I wonder if with Caleb Downs getting similar laudits, even if he's not the size length guy that Kyle Hamilton is, where does he end up coming off the board? Because I don't, Derwin James fell way outside of the top 10. He fell to pick 19, I believe. Kyle Hamilton falls outside the top 10. We haven't seen a guy go top 10 at safety since 2016. Does that change? Or does the NFL just say, hey, we can wait on this position? There's strong enough guys on day 2 that I don't need to use a top 10 pick on Caleb Downs. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, 4 more position groups to go. We have wide receiver, offensive line, linebackers, and cornerbacks. Which one's the strongest? Well, we'll find out right after this. Rolling through the strongest position groups in the 2026 NFL Draft on today's edition of Pushing the Pile. We're on to number 4, where we're going to talk wide receivers. This may be a little controversial. I know some people are very high on this receiver class. I'm not as high, and I think the one big reason is top end talent. To me, I do not see a top 10 wide receiver in this draft class. There are a lot of guys who I would call specialists. I don't see a lot of do it all number ones. I see a lot of guys who can be very good sort of number twos. And now number twos in the NFL often, are 1,000-yard receivers, especially in today's day and age. But I think that's the biggest thing holding me back. But I will say 16 top 100 guys on my board in this receiver class. Last year, we only saw 12 come off the board in the top 100. So from that perspective, it is strong. The depth is great. I just don't think the top end talent is quite there to get me on board with it.
I definitely agree with you. And I think it's very similar to the edge class in a way where it's like there's not a lot of superstars. And if you want to compare, I like to compare wide receivers and wide receiver groups in football to basketball lineups and basketball rotations. There is not a Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. There is not a LeBron in this receiver class, but there are a lot of very quality role players, like guys that you need in your starting 5 that'll help sort of round everybody out. I think the perfect example of that, I think outside of the top guys, is a guy like Jeremy Bernard from Alabama, who is not going to be like everybody's like wide receiver 2, the electrifying, like he's not going to take a lot of targets, but I think he's just going to be reliable and he's going to allow for the other stars on the team to do what they do best. And I think because of how well like offenses have been able to run, like of course we just saw JSN sort of power the Seahawks to a Super Bowl, but teams without superstar like receivers have been winning in the NFL based on the fact they just have a bunch of guys who maximize their roles really well. I think of a team like the Jaguars after acquiring Jacoby Myers. They had a whole bunch of guys who did their job well, and Jacoby Myers sort of let them maximize what they did in their specialties or in their roles. So I think this receiver class has a lot of guys who might be profiling best as, like you said, wide receiver 2s, but we look at it right now, like wide receiver 2s get paid $30 million a year. So I think that's still good money for them.
Yeah, when you have when you have like middling wide receivers get paid as much as first round linebackers who turn out good, like Devin Lloyd got $15 million a year. That's a wide receiver 3 in today's NFL. If you're not factoring that into your draft calculus when you're taking these guys, I think you're doing it wrong. And I do think there's going to be a lot of, so from that perspective, I think there's, the top 5 in this draft class, whether it's, Jordan Tyson, Mekhi Lemon, Carnell Tate, Omar Cooper Jr., and Casey Concepcion. Those 5, I all expect to go first round. I expect them to be the first 5 off the board in some order. And I think they all have really high floors. I think you can basically chalk up 4 years from now, a $15+ million contract from them, right? Like you can chalk up the fact that they'll be good. So from that perspective, yeah, they're going to go first round because of that. They look like they are high floor wide receivers. Are any of them JSN even? Are any of them Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, even close to those tiers? I don't think so. I just don't see it in this draft class. But I do think that we'll be sitting here 4 years from now, like I said, and say, yeah, it was a good draft class for wide receivers. It was a deep class. And I think there will be a bunch of guys drafted on day 2. Now, obviously, the hit rate goes down considerably on day 2. But I do think we'll see a bunch of guys from day 2 turn out to be, number 2s, number 3s in the NFL. It's just very well-rounded in that regard with a lot of different flavors, a lot of different body types. So I think ultimately it turns out to be a pretty good class for a lot of people. The next group is one that I was a little lower on early in the process. And the more I saw these guys as athletes, the more I watched their tape and watched their career progressions, the more I'm like, I think this is actually a very good class in this regard. It's the offensive line class. I ended up with 20 offensive linemen in my top 100. 19 came off the board last year in the top 100. And it was a pretty good offensive line class a year ago. So a very strong class. I think we could see 8, if not 9 offensive linemen taken in this year's first round. That's how strong I believe it is. Now, I think it gets a lot thinner on the day 2, but if you tell me 9 offensive linemen coming off in round 1, that is a historically good offensive line class.
I'm curious how you break it up when it comes to tackle versus interior offensive line, because I do think this tackle class has a little bit more question marks. I mean, if we're just looking at the top guys, there have been questions about if Francis Noah or Spencer Fano can A, play on the left side, or B, play tackle in general. So if we're looking at true tackles, you're looking at guys like Monroe Freeling, who was very good in his final games of the season, but is also a one-year starter with a lot of still technical upside left to get to. Caleb Lomu from Utah is incredibly high ceiling athlete, needs to put on some more weight and add some more power to his game. Caden Proctor from Alabama is a guy that the highs are super high with him. The lows are very, very low. So it depends on what you think of him as both a tackle or versus a guard. But I'm curious how this group shakes out. If we broke this down into 11 instead of 10 and separated between tackle and guard, where would they rank?
That's the thing. And it'll change from person to person. Right. Some people see Caden Proctor as a guard. Some people see Spencer Fano as a guard. Some people see Francis Noah as a guard. And if that's, all 3 of those you're counting as guards, it all of a sudden becomes a very weak tackle class, right? It's a very different looking tackle class. But if you think all 3 can play tackle, it's all of a sudden like, hey, this is a good tackle class. So it very much is an eye of the beholder. My take, Proctor, Fano, I'm sticking at tackle for now. And I think truly can stick at tackle long term. Maui Noah is the one where, yes, he could stick at tackle. I think all 3 can, but he's the one that, to me, profiles most similarly to a guard, whether it's the body type, whether it's his work in a phone booth. I mean, the other 2, I think we're moving to guard for the reason of Proctor, because you don't think he has the foot speed for NFL speed, with Fano, because you don't think he has the arm length. It's not necessarily that their game profile is better to the interior. It's that there's worries about what they can do on the edge. I think Maui Noah truly, in a phone booth, is special. I think he will be a Pro Bowl guard if moved there. He'd be a good tackle, but I think his ceiling pushes higher at guard. And with contracts now climbing similar, right? The highest paid offensive tackle, I think, is only making $4 million more per year than the highest paid interior offensive lineman. When the numbers are that similar and you can be top of the market guy at guard versus, I think above average at tackle, give me the top of the market guy at guard. So that's why I move Maui Noah inside on my rankings.
And I think Maui Noah for me also might be more of a guard. I think you give him a shot at tackle, but he profiles very similarly to Steve Avila, a guy that was a tackle, moved inside the guard, plays guard for the Rams. I think that's just where he might fit best, but I give him a shot at tackle. I'm leaning more towards guard for Proctor, mainly just because I think the foot speed is just, I think that's going to really struggle. He's going to really struggle in the NFL at the foot speed. And Fano, I think he's going to be a better guard or center than tackle, just because I like his movement skills on the interior. And it sort of minimizes the power that he doesn't really have in his game a lot. I think that works better at guard or center. But all 3 of those guys, if you just get them on the field, I think they have the athletic potential to become really special.
It will be very interesting offensive line class to track. We have made it through positions 10 through 3. Only 2 more left, the strongest 2 position groups in the 2026 NFL draft class. We will break them down coming up right after this. We've been ranking position groups from weakest to strongest in the 2026 NFL draft here on Pushing the Pile, and we got only 2 left, JP. And without further ado, the number 2 position group in this draft class It's the cornerback group, which it's not deep. I don't think it's the deepest cornerback group I've seen. And truly, compared to last year, there was 14 corners taken in the top 100 last year. I only have 12 in my top 100. But what it has that I think reminds me of like the 2022 cornerback class is it's got top end talent. I love the top of this cornerback class. That's why compared to the wide receiver class that I ranked fourth, I put it ahead because there's three corners in this draft class that I have higher on my board than the top wide receiver in this draft class. I have three guys in my top 15. I love Jermod McCoy from Tennessee. I love Mansour Delane from LSU, and I love Avion Terrell from Clemson. I think we're going to be looking back in 4 years saying those are three of the best corners in the NFL. And then I got two more in my top 32. I got Chris Johnson from San Diego State and D'Angelo Pounds from Indiana, both in my top 32. So 5 top 32 corners, 3 in the top 15. That's a special class, in my opinion. If you need a cornerback, there are options for you here at the top of the draft.
And what also stands out about this class to me at cornerback is this might be the coolest nickel cornerback class I think I've ever scouted. There's so many guys I think, oh, that guy would be an awesome nickel. Where like D'Angelo Pons is going to be a nickel for 10 plus years in the NFL. Avion Terrell could be a matchup guy outside, inside, but he could be a really fun player to put at nickel, very similar to Devin Witherspoon. I think Witherspoon was obviously more explosive of an athlete, but Avion Terrell has that same demeanor and physicality that you want to have a nickel corner. Keontae Scott is going to be a nickel for a long time in the NFL. I think Keith Abney and Chandler Rivers from Arizona State and Duke, both probably going to be long-time nickels in the NFL. I even think a guy like Brandon Cisse, who I'm not as high on as most people, I think he could also be a great nickel in this in the NFL. So I think there's so many because of how important the nickels position has been in the modern NFL. There's so many guys where I'm just like, you know what? Put that guy in nickel, and I think he's going to be an impact player for at least a decade.
I'm so glad you brought up Cisse because when I watch his tape, the thing that gets me the most excited is just the way he feels against the run. Like that guy will come up, and he's 189 pounds, which again, that's tough to hold up as a nickel. We've seen Devon Witherspoon for the Seahawks be awesome as a nickel over the course of his career, but the guy gets banged up because he's not that big. So maybe teams don't want to move him there for that reason, but like he's only 20. He's one of the youngest guys in this draft class. I want to see him at nickel. I think that's where he could really flourish. And I agree. This is a draft class that's going to probably proliferate throughout the NFL and probably have about a quarter of the league starting nickels 3 years from now, because that's how many guys have awesome skill sets to profile to that position in this draft class. But I want to get to the top of the class for just a second. I want your take on where you see Jermod McCoy, Mansour Delane, Avion Terrell historically, because I came away incredibly high on the tape of all three of these guys. If you want to draft any of them in the top 10, I'm not going to argue. Not all three were top 10 on my board, but they're all very close. And Jermod McCoy specifically, when I watch his tape, I'm from sophomore year, and again, we never got to see junior year, and that's going to be a big thing with him, but from sophomore year, it's right up there with the likes of Derek Stingley's sophomore tape, Sauce Gardner's sophomore tape, Patrick Surtain's sophomore tape, Leonard Moore's sophomore tape at Notre Dame. It's darn good. So I'm very curious to see where he comes off the board and how high you are on him.
I love Jermod McCoy. I know he had the ACL injury, but he just ran and worked out at the pro day, and he ran fast and he jumped high. He has the best sophomore tape, I think, of any. He has the best single season of tape of any corner in this draft class with his 2024. He is never, the thing that stands out the most to me is he never looks like he's out of phase or he's panicking. And because he's such a great athlete, he can always put himself back into position in man coverage. He'll do he breaks a lot of rules at the cornerback spot where he'll do the inverted turn, where he'll turn his butt away from the receiver when you want to try and use the sideline and try and shield him to the sideline to squeeze space. No, he'll turn the other way and run with him and try and make the play on the ball. You don't really teach that, but because he's a great athlete, he can do that kind of stuff. And I just think his patience at the line of scrimmage is so cool to watch. I think he is still my cornerback one. I would still draft him high. I actually like Avion Terrell a little bit more than Mansour Delane because like Avion Terrell just plays my type of football. He is not going to give up at the catch point, even though he's a little undersized. He plays physical. There's a rep against Troy where they're running like a little swing screen, and it reminds me of the Devin Witherspoon play at Illinois where he blows up the screen pass. It reminds me of that. And I'm just like, that guy can play for me every single day of the week. Forced 5 fumbles in his final season at Clemson, which is unheard of for an outside corner. And because of how much teams want to play matchup football, Avion Terrell is a guy that I think is going to be a really nice piece for a creative defensive coordinator to have inside or outside. And in Mansour Lane, I just think he's such a smooth mover. I think how quickly he moves, his hips and transitions sort of overshadows the lack of height, the lack of length. And I do think he ran faster at his pro day than I actually thought he ran on tape. But I think he's a smooth guy. I have all 3 of them as first rounders, but I think McCoy should be the first corner off the board, even with that ACL injury.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with truly everything you said. I love Avion Terrell. He's a top 10 player on my draft board. We'll see where he ends up, though, on draft day. All right, the last position group. Strongest position group in this class. To me, the one position that's the strongest position I've scouted in this draft class, even any draft class. I've been doing this since 2015. The linebacker class this year, I think, is special, and especially when you add the fact that Arvell Reese, you could consider a linebacker in this draft class. Yashawn Barham from Michigan, you could consider a linebacker in this draft class. If you add both those guys to the mix, I have 9 linebackers in my top 100. To put that in perspective, only 4 came off the board in the top 100 last year. And there's even guys that aren't in my top 100 that wouldn't surprise me if they ended up going top 100, like Keyshawn Elliott from Arizona State. So awesome class, 7 guys in my top 60 in this linebacker class. To me, it is the strongest position group. If you need a linebacker, you are in luck this year.
I think it's so cool that we're getting a great linebacker class when the NFL desperately needs linebackers. I think we reached a point in the NFL where like not drafting linebackers early was like the cool thing to do because you could find them later down the board. They don't make as much. But when you look at what defenses want to do and what they want to be in the NFL, having a Mike linebacker who can actually withstand getting hit by 320 plus pound guards, but also affect the passing game as a blitzer or coverage guy, I think that matters so much at the NFL level. I think of, again, the Jaguars, how they use Devin Lloyd. And as a blitzer, as a coverage guy in the run game, you need guys that are going to be versatile. And I think all these guys that are in the top 100 have that versatility, from guys like Sonny Styles, who might be the best player in this draft class overall with the range and the IQ, to guys like Josiah Trotter, who is a menace as a blitzer. Jake Golday is a really fun player. There's so many cool body types and playing styles that up and down the board, there are going to be guys that are going to be starting in a few years.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit with safety, and this will be an interesting class of safety, about to see how the NFL values it. I think that also applies to linebacker, because Sonny Styles, to start with him, like you said, he might be the best player regardless of position. I think at worst, he's 3rd on your list, right? This guy is a uniquely freaky safety, the freakiest linebacker athlete, I said safety, freakiest linebacker athlete I've ever seen, and only getting better, only 21 years old, despite being 4 years at Ohio State. So where he comes off the board, if it's top 5, will be the first time since 2019. And I think he will. But then after that, where does the NFL value it? Because there's probably, like you said, 7 guys in my top 60. There's a lot of guys I would call second-round linebackers. Do we see 7 guys go in the top 2 rounds? It'll be very interesting to track that. But whatever skill set, whatever size you want, whether it's jumbo pass rushers like Jake Golday, there's going to be one for you. If there's undersized coverage guys like Kyle Lewis from Pittsburgh, there's going to be one for you. So it's a great class. It's the #1 class on our list. There you have it. That's our show for today. Make sure to tune in to Pushing the Pile twice a week. We'll be back on Friday with the show at noon Eastern. Until then, keep pushing.